Hello and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the fourth episode of Political Thinkers and Ideas. Today we are going to discuss Thomas Hobbes, an English political thinker. Let me first explain what are we going to discuss about Thomas Hobbes in this session. See, we'll understand the context in which he grew up. So we'll understand who was Thomas Hobbes. Second, we'll understand his views of human nature. What is human nature as per Thomas Hobbes? Third, we'll understand his social contract theory. It is through this theory, that is the social contract theory, that Hobbes answers certain questions like what is the source of the sovereign power, or where does a sovereign derive his power from? What are the rights and duties of the sovereign? Why should we obey the sovereign power? Now, all these questions are answered through this theory called social contract theory. That's what we are going to understand in this session. Now, let's first understand who was Thomas Hobbes. See, Thomas Hobbes was born in 1588 AD at Westport in Wiltshire, England. Thomas Hobbes was abandoned by his father along with his two other siblings. He was taken care of by his uncle, who sent him to a very good school at Westport. Then he went to Oxford University and took a degree in arts in 1608. Thomas Hobbes, after finishing his degree at Oxford, took a job with Cavendish family. He became a tutor to the young William Cavendish. Who was he? He was the son or the eldest son of the Earl of Devonshire. Thomas Hobbes remained associated with this family throughout his life. He did not take any other job, but remained associated with this family only. Hobbes also wrote many important books like Elements of Law, Natural and Politic, Leviathan, and other books like Concerning Citizen, Concerning Body, and so on. Now, Leviathan is the most important book if you have to understand his political thought. Hobbes also experienced an important event in English history called the English Civil War of 1640s. Now, what was this war about? See, this war occurred between the parliamentary forces and the royalist forces, between the people who supported the power of the parliament and between the forces who supported power of the king. Now, Hobbes was on the side of the royalists. That means he supported the power or the absolute power of the king, like he can impose taxes in certain situations. Now, Hobbes' book, Elements of Law, Natural and Politic, was also used to justify the power of the king by the royalists. That's why Hobbes left England during this civil war and went to France. Right? So the civil war ended with the beheading of King Charles I in 1649. Now, this was an important event in English history. Hobbes died in 1679 AD. Now, let's understand Hobbes' philosophy of materialism and his methodology. We understood a little bit of context of Hobbes. Now, let's understand what is it he believed in, because it's also an important century. A lot of scientific developments happened during his time. He met many important scientists like Galileo. He corresponded with Descartes, the great mathematician and the philosopher. So he was basically influenced by scientific developments and scientific methodology. Now, what was his philosophy? His philosophy is called materialism. What is materialism? It's simply the belief that universe consists of nothing but matter. This matter is either in motion or at rest. So if you have to understand the universe, all you need to do is to understand the matter. You don't need concepts or entities like God or supernatural forces to understand the universe. Now, that's what materialism means. You can even explain an individual or a human being mechanically, because it's also a material reality. Right? So even the psychology of a human being, the thoughts of a human being can be explained mechanically. So you don't need the idea of God to explain the universe. You don't need the idea of soul to explain an individual or his psychology. That's what Hobbes subscribed to the philosophy of materialism. Hobbes, as I mentioned earlier, was also influenced by the methodology of the scientists of the 17th century. For example, Galileo used this method called resolutive composite method. And he was also influenced by geometry. In fact, he came to geometry or studied it in his late life, in 40s. Before that, he had not heard of geometry. He was so much inspired by this methodology. Let's explain them one by one. See, resolutive composite method simply means if you have to understand any system, you break it down into parts. Right? Any system consists of parts. Now, if you have to understand it, you focus on these parts, arrive at some understanding of these parts. That will give you an overall understanding of the system. Hobbes said we can use this method to understand politics as well. How? See, if you have to understand politics, you understand its constituent unit, which is an individual. You understand the nature of an individual. That will give you an insight about politics. Now, this is about resolutive composite method that Hobbes used to analyze and understand politics. He was, as I mentioned, also influenced by geometry, because geometry has rules, and then these rules are justified through clear logical steps. Now, Hobbes was so much inspired by this that he said we can do the same thing in politics as well. In fact, he said his book Leviathan is written in the light of this method called geometry. Now, this is about Hobbes' philosophy of materialism and his methodology that is derives from the science. Right now, let's understand his political ideas. First, the idea of human nature. See, Hobbes says that human beings seek pleasure and avoid pain. That is, we seek pleasure and we try to avoid pain. Now, we are in this universe. We receive different inputs from the environment. Now, we calculate that input or stimuli. Whatever gives us pleasure, we want to retain it. And whatever gives us pain, we want to avoid it. Right? For example, the fear of death. Right? We want to avoid death because that causes us pain, because that threatens our existence. So that's why we try to avoid it. These are the two laws that govern our behavior. Now, Hobbes is laying down the foundations of utilitarianism, which is later developed in the English history by other philosophers like Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill or John Stuart Mill. Now, what does good and evil become if we seek pleasure and try to avoid pain? Simply, good and evil means nothing for Hobbes except those things which promote pleasure are good things, those things which promote pain or cause us pain are evil or bad things. Now, that's the idea of morality you can derive from this hedonistic or utilitarian analysis of human behavior according to Thomas Hobbes. Right? So, this is what Thomas Hobbes believes about human psychology or human behavior. Now, please understand, it's through reason or this capacity called reason, we calculate this input from the environment. We calculate what gives us pain, what gives us pleasure. It is reason that enables us to do that. Whatever gives us pleasure, as I mentioned earlier, we want to retain it. In fact, Hobbes says that we want to live or remain in a state of pleasure or prolong it. That's called felicity. Right? So we try to avoid pain, we try to seek or retain pleasure. But please understand, this right to preserve ourselves, to prolong our pleasure, to avoid pain, to preserve ourselves is given by nature to us. Means it's not given to any other institution or government by nature. It's given to us by nature only. Means we have the responsibility and the ability or the capacity to preserve ourselves. Now the question is, if it is given by nature to us, how can we then establish government? Because we need to transfer this power to the government or a third party. How can we do this if it is given to us by nature? Hobbes says we can understand it through a concept called state of nature. Now, state of nature is not a historical condition, right? Simply a guess, a logical guess that Hobbes makes to make us understand the nature of power, or to make us understand why we need to give power to the government, or why we need to establish a sovereign power. Let's understand that. See, state of nature, as I mentioned, is simply a condition where there is no government. Now imagine all of us living in a condition without a government. Now, what that condition would be? Hobbes says, without government, there will be perpetual and restless desire for power. Why? See, all of us will try to preserve ourselves, right? This is given by nature to us, this right. Now, if we do that, there will be a desire or a restless desire for self-preservation. Everyone will try to do that. Preserve themselves, maximize their power. Now, this will make the situation or whatever condition we live in as a condition of conflict. It means that I'm trying to maximize my power. I'm trying to preserve myself. So are you. So is everyone, right? So that makes it a situation of conflict because we are responsible for our own preservation. Now, it is a situation of war of one against everyone. A war of every man against every man, that's what Hobbes calls it. Simply means that it's a situation of conflict, there is mutual suspicion, there is anarchy, because everyone is responsible for his own security. Now, this condition makes life, as per Hobbes, very solitary, poor, nasty, and brutish. These words simply tell us that the life would be very poor because it would be a situation of, as I mentioned, conflict. It would be a situation of war, it would be a situation of suspicion, so everyone would be fearful of everyone. Now, this anarchic situation, people will still realize certain natural dictates called natural laws. And because we are rational people, because we have reason as a capacity, we will understand certain natural laws. What are natural laws? These are natural dictums that we understand because we have a rational capacity. Now, Hobbes says we'll still understand these natural laws. He says there are 90 natural laws, out of them 3 are more important. These are also called as articles of peace. Now, what are these 3 natural laws that we will recognize? Number 1, Hobbes says, we'll recognize that it is rational to seek peace. Now, when there is conflict around us, right, there is suspicion around us, we would realize, rather it would be rational to seek peace, right? We would realize that it's important for us to seek peace because there are threats everywhere. Second, we'll say the peace has to be secured. It has to be secured through an agreement, that we need to agree that let's end this disorder, this insecurity. Third, we will also realize that we shouldn't break this agreement. It would be irrational to break this agreement that we made that we should establish peace. Why would be it irrational? Because it will again take us back to the anarchic situation. Now, these are the 3 natural laws that we will recognize. Every individual will recognize. Now, these are mere words as per Hobbes. This realization is important, but you need to give effect to this realization. So, you need to give effect to this agreement. You need to create a sovereign power who can implement this agreement. That's why Hobbes says, I authorize, means every one of us authorize, I authorize, you authorize, and give up my right of governing myself to this man. This man could be a monarch or an assembly of men, on this condition that you give up your right to him and authorize him in all like manner, or authorize his actions, or give him authority to rule us. Right? So this is the nature of the contract. Right? So we make a contract and give this power to a third party called the sovereign. We authorize the sovereign that you have this power to ensure that peace is restored in our society, right? We authorize him that you put an end to anarchy which arises in the state of nature. That's why Hobbes says sovereign power is absolute. We make an agreement, create an absolute sovereign. Sovereign himself is not part of this contract or this agreement between us. That's why he says this sovereign has unlimited power. It's absolute power. It's indivisible power. And writes that this is the generation of great Leviathan, or the mortal God, to which we owe under the immortal God our peace and defense. Now we made an agreement, created a sovereign who's a third party, is not part of the agreement, but all of us agreed in the state of nature that you ensure peace. Now that becomes the source of your power. That is, our consent, our agreement becomes the source of the sovereign power. So a king derives his power from the people, from the consent of the people. And what is the aim of this sovereign power? To restore peace or to provide peace and security to the people. Now, this is what Thomas Hobbes says about sovereignty through his social contract theory. Now, what did we understand? That without a government, there will be anarchy, there will be insecurity. So, we will realize that we need peace. We will realize we need to create a sovereign power, a third party, which will ensure that peace is provided in the society. So, in other words, sovereign power derives his power from the consent of people, but once people give their consent, they are bound by this authority. His authority or his sovereign power is unlimited. So, Hobbes basically justifies absolute monarchy because he says this power is absolute, calls him the great Leviathan, right? The mortal God under the immortal God. Immortal God is the supreme God, and the sovereign is the mortal God, a God who dies. That tells you the significance of his power, that he has immense power. Now, what are the rights of the sovereign power? That we should obey him. Why should we obey him? We'll come to that later when we discuss political obligation, because we gave him this power to promote peace and security. What is the duty of this sovereign power? That he should promote peace and security. If he does not, if he fails to promote peace and security, we can disobey him. Means we'll take the consent back and go back to the state of nature. So why should we obey the sovereign power? Because as I mentioned earlier, we gave him the power. It is on our consent that he exercises his power. So therefore it is moral for us to follow the sovereign. It's moral to honor our own contract, right? It's in the state of nature. We realized that we need peace. We realized we need to make an agreement. We realized we need to create a sovereign power who will give an effect to this agreement. Therefore, it's moral for us to follow our own contract. So that's one of the sources of political obligation. Second, it is dangerous to disobey the sovereign power. Why? Because the sovereign power is absolute. He's the head of the state, he's the head of the church. Whatever he says becomes law. No association within his state can limit his power because he is absolute. See, Hobbes is in favor of an absolute monarchy. His sovereign has the absolute power. Now, if he has this power, he can punish you. It will be very dangerous if you disobey him. So that's another source of political obligation. You might not want to disobey the sovereign because it would be dangerous for you. Third, it's rational to obey the sovereign. Why is it rational to obey the sovereign? Because if we obey the sovereign, we also get peace and security. You basically preserve your own self. Now, from the beginning I said self-preservation is given to us by nature. We transfer this right because if we become our own masters or if we become the sovereigns ourselves, there will be a situation of insecurity or anarchy. In order to get rid of this insecurity, we create a sovereign power. In fact, we make him so powerful, but on this condition that he promotes peace and security. If he does not, then we can disobey him. So the only condition in which we can disobey him is when he tries to threaten our lives, or if he loses power to another king, for example. So in that sense, he's already shown that he's not capable to protect the state, to protect us. That's why we can disobey him. Now this brings us to an end of discussion about Hobbes. Let's quickly summarize what we discussed so far, then we will go to the questions that we can expect in the examination. See, we understood Hobbes' views of human nature, that is, human beings seek pleasure and try to avoid pain. We understood that it's reason that calculates the stimuli from the environment and tells us what is promoting pleasure and what is promoting or causing pain. Now, this right of self-preservation is given to us by nature. It's not given to government. Therefore, the question arises, how can we justify the existence of government? We can justify it on the basis of state of nature, a hypothetical situation that Hobbes imagines to arrive at answers to this question. In the state of nature, life would be very poor because every one of us will try to promote our security. That will make it an anarchic situation. The only way to get out of this situation is invoking a reason or using our reason and understanding the natural dictates that we need peace. We need an agreement to secure this peace. In other words, we need to create a government or a sovereign power and give him absolute power so that he protects us or promotes order in our society. Right? So this is what we discussed about Hobbes' political theory. Now let's look at questions that we can expect in the examination. See, number one, Hobbes' premises about the origin of the sovereignty are liberal, but his conclusions are illiberal. Discuss. See, we discussed it in detail. What is the origin of the sovereignty as per Hobbes? He says it's the consent of the people, right? By invoking the concept, the hypothetical situation called the state of nature. Now, consent makes him a liberal. Like his premises are liberal because the source of power or the sovereign power is the consent of the people. But what is his conclusion? This power that sovereign acquires from the consent of the people is absolute, is unlimited, is indivisible. That makes him an illiberal. Now that's how you can discuss this question or write this answer for this question. Now let's look at the second question. What are the rights and duties of the sovereign as per Hobbes? See, I already explained it that the rights of the sovereign is that we have to obey him, right? He has absolute power because of certain reasons, moral, rational, and other reasons like it would be dangerous to disobey him. Now what are his duties? His only duty is to promote peace and defense. His only duty is to preserve us because this right was given to us by nature, but because all of us tried to preserve ourselves, it led to an anarchic situation that created mistrust and insecurity for every one of us. Therefore, we created this sovereign so that he restores this peace or provides security for everyone. If he fails to do this duty, we can disobey him. We already discussed this. So you can write an answer like this. Now, this brings us to an end of today's discussion. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thanks for watching.